Good morning and welcome to all of you. Your very presence today demonstrates that you are leaders and advocates, and you are the key to creating solutions to improve our present and to change our future. I'm going to ask that all of you please join me for a moment of silence for the countless victims of racial violence that has plagued our nation. Thank you. NEOMED has taken a stand against hatred, against racism, and against violence in this country that has been highlighted by the deaths of George Floyd, of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, and by so many before them. I need everyone to understand that at NEOMED, we are one community. Our excellence and our compassion are fueled by our diversity, our inclusiveness, and by the key principle of equality. But to say these things is not enough. To say that we stand against racism is not enough. To say we need change is also not enough. We must engage and we must actively become part of the solution. I have heard from many of our students, our faculty, and our staff over the course of these last 2 weeks. And I applaud them for their amazing courage and their thoughtful conversations as they look to implement change and ask, what is it we can do as a university? What is it we can do as a community to change the narrative that has plagued our country? What is the role that NEOMED can have in moving this forward? Because we all need to become part of that solution. Today is the beginning of our next step. It's our call to action. Like all solutions, they are strongest when they are created and driven by the diversity of thought of all of you, our change leaders. And that's what today is about. It's about all of us coming together and sharing our ideas, sharing our thoughts, and fueling this conversation with potential solutions that we can use to have impact and to drive change. Today, we want to hear from you. Today, we want to hear what your experiences have been, to hear what you have observed and how you feel we should move forward. Today, we ask you to stand up and fight for the safety and the wellness of our diverse community. Before we move on, I want to thank Mr. Rod Ingram and Mr. Andre Burton and Ms. Michelle Mulhern for coordinating this event today. And I also want to thank Michael Wright and his team for serving as our IT support to allow us to be able to do this virtually. Before we move forward, I'd first like to briefly hear from some of our key faculty, students, and staff who are leaders and advocates for this change. And once we've done that, then the floor is going to be yours. The solutions we develop will be yours, and we will implement them and unify as a university and as a community. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Andre Burton.
Thank you, Dr. Langell. And I'd like to first thank the NEOMED community for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion today and to provide my perspective as the Chief Diversity Officer of the university. I had the privilege since 2012 of being the Chief Diversity Officer here at NEOMED. But what many may not know is that coupled with the time I've spent here, I have collectively over 20 years of experience doing diversity and inclusion work. Something that, as you all may know who know me, I'm extremely passionate about. It's about recognizing those unique aspects of every person at this university and the value of the collective experiences that we all have, the backgrounds that we all have, and the perspectives that we all have. And then the ability that I've been trying to do is couple that with inclusion and the idea that with all these different identities, that we value those individuals, that we leverage the talents that they have, and that we give them an opportunity to feel welcome within our environment. So, you know, as a chief diversity officer, my colleagues often say that the inclusion part is the quality of the human experience that we all hope to have. But racism is the biggest enemy to diversity and inclusion. At the core of diversity is at the core, it can destroy the core of diversity and inclusion. It's the denominator of diversity and inclusion, which is that we're all human beings first. That's the baseline that we have to establish in order for diversity and inclusion to work. So the acts that we've witnessed over the last few weeks have had a profound impact on me as an African-American man. Just witnessing the murder of Mr. Floyd under the knee of a ill-willed, immoral law enforcement official, seeing the actual hunting down of Mr. Ahmaud Arbery by racist individuals, it just continued to demonstrate to me that there are some people, not all, but some people who still do not value Black and brown people as human beings. They just don't. They don't view us as human beings. And so my work here at NEOMED and at every organization I've had the blessing to be a part of, I've always wanted to make sure that I had made an imprint in creating an environment where everyone, regardless of their race and background, feel valued, feel respected, and feel that they were a part of the organization. I drive here every day, Monday through Friday, from Cleveland, laser focused on that goal. That's the first thing I think about when I'm on my way here at NEOMED, is creating that environment. But I have to admit, it's been difficult at times, not necessarily here at the organization, but in the surrounding community of Rootstown and coming here to this university. I have experienced on at least 4 occasions being followed by law enforcement for miles where I haven't done anything wrong. And that anxiety and nervousness that I feel about as a part of that. I've been at the Speedway on 43 getting gas and had a car with 2 white gentlemen in it yell out, "Nigger, what are you doing here?" I've received on occasion menacing stares, hateful looking stares, while I'm going over to Giant Eagle to get supplies for a diversity student event from customers that are in the store. This is something that is not uncommon for Black people and brown people, unfortunately. And by no means is it only occurring in Rootstown. But it goes back to what I said earlier. It's about that core of valuing people as human beings first. So despite that fear that I often have when I reflect on what happened to Mr. Floyd, when I drive here and leave here every day from NEOMED, that I may come across a immoral or ill-willed law enforcement officer where it's a possibility that my life could be lost, I still come here even with that concern and anxiety, because I feel in a small way that I want to make an impact on the people of the institution. I think it's important for me to do that. And hopefully, if I can make a positive impact, that impact will cause folks to view each other more as human beings and to respect each other more. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done here at NEOMED in the last 12 years. It has not just been me. It's been people of all backgrounds here at this organization that has helped us get a little further on the diversity pendulum. But we have a long way to go. We have a very long way to go to where I think we should be. And it can't just be me. It can't just be Dr. Langell. It can't just be Dr. Altman, who's the chair of the Diversity Council. And it definitely cannot be the Black and brown people of this organization to make a change here. It has to take all of us. It has to take all of us to make this community better. So this is the time I ask you as the Chief Diversity Officer here at this university to take a stand. Help me make this place better. And I ask you to also not remain silent. I want you to think about, what if that was your family member that was on the ground like Mr. Floyd was? Wouldn't you want someone to speak out? Wouldn't you want someone to take a stand? So that is my plea to you, to help me make this institution even better than it is today. So some of the actions that I think we really need to address is that I need the help of our leadership in our colleges and our faculty to do what Dr. Langell mentioned a few weeks ago when he heard from that student who asked, can we enrich our curriculum to include more diversity about people of color, Black and brown people? Can we increase the diversity of our faculty so that some of our students see those who look somewhat like them? Help me increase the staff diversity of the university so that we're more reflective of the community that we're trying to develop our students to serve. We all play a part in making that happen. It can't just be me as the head of HR and diversity. I need every single one of you to help us do that. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about what I've experienced. And I love NEOMED, I really do. I think we have a great opportunity to do some great things here. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this team. And now I'll pass it over to Chief Miyasi.
Good morning, everybody. I guess first I want to say, Andre, it just saddens and sickens me that you have had those experiences. But I do appreciate you sharing them. I know that actions speak louder than words, but I do have to reiterate that the actions of those Minneapolis officers were appalling, sickening, downright evil, contrary to the beliefs and values of the NEOMED Police Department. Today is about honest conversation, informing purposeful actions. So I thought it would be meaningful to all of you if I talk about some of the policies and procedures that the NEOMED Police Department has in place and has had in place for several years as efforts to prevent these types of incidents from happening on our campus. I think these are all things the larger campus population is unaware of, but I think it's important that everybody know that they exist. Most of you know that we created our police department in 2015. And prior to starting that process, one of the best pieces of advice I got was to invest in our hiring process, because hiring the right people is crucial. And I cannot stress enough how critical it is to make sure you have the right people serving your community and building trust within that community. The hiring process includes several steps to make sure that we hire officers who not only value diversity, but who are compassionate and empathetic. And one of those steps in our hiring process that I wanted to talk with you about is our psychological assessment. And fortunately, with the company that we work with to do these assessments, we were able to pick factors that we wanted to assess in our candidates. So those were factors that aligned with the university and aligned with the kind of police department we were trying to create. The culture of a police department depends greatly on the people you have within the department, as well as the people who support your department. NEOMED fosters a culture of care. So having a culture of compassionate and empathetic officers who serve our community ethically and equitably was one of my most important goals when we established our department. So in the psychological assessment, there's two areas that we assess. One is law enforcement factors and the other is emotional intelligence factors. Within the law enforcement factors, we look at things like valuing diversity, courtesy, even temperament, and compassion. because we want all of our officers to have those qualities. Under decision making, we look at integrity, judgment, and objectivity. For emotional intelligence factors, the ones that I think are most pertain the most to this conversation are personal factors such as even temperament and building trust, and then relationship factors like empathy and relating to others. In addition to the psychological assessment, like face-to-face interview questions, scenarios, and polygraph questions to try to draw out prejudice and bias and to test integrity. In the interview, we explain how campus policing differs from policing in a municipality, and we spend time explaining the importance of valuing diversity on the NEOMED campus. In December of 2014, then Governor Kasich established the Ohio Task Force on Community Police Relations, which he talked about earlier this week, or I'm sorry, Governor DeWine talked about earlier this week in his press conference. This task force was a 24-member multidisciplinary group that looked deeply into police community relations across the state. And then in 2015, the Ohio Collaborative Community Police Advisory Board was created. The Ohio Collaborative oversees the implementation of recommendations from the task force on community police relations. This resulted in state standards for police for the first time in Ohio's history. The NEOMED Police Department has actively and willingly participated in this voluntary program. We've maintained compliance with the Ohio Collaborative since its inception. The standards hold officers accountable and hopefully help to instill greater confidence in the public. A few of the Ohio Collaborative policies are use of force, which includes reporting and investigating use of force, community engagement, investigation of employee misconduct, recruitment and hiring, bias-free policing. And these policies are all in addition to any NEOMED policies. So these are policies specific to the NEOMED Police Department. I do have a high level of confidence in our police department because of our hiring and training processes and because of our policies and procedures, but I know we can still do better. I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation so we can learn what we can do to be better and to serve this community better. I look forward to opportunities to work with our Criminal Justice Coordinating Center of Excellence, our faculty, staff, and students, and with law enforcement and community partners to review and improve our current policies so that we can all move forward together. And I just want to close by saying that I know that public trust in law enforcement has been lost, but I hope that as a profession, we're able to take the necessary steps to regain that trust, because that's the foundation of solid community police relationships. Thank you.
Callie, this is Amy Lee. I'm professor from Family and Community Medicine and program director for the Consortium of Eastern Ohio Master Public Health Program. I've worked with you and your staff and really appreciate your efforts and your staff's efforts at your attention to this issue. So thank you so much for that. I've been asked to talk on behalf of public health, and I want to start off by telling you what the definition of public health is. William Fagey, who is instrumental to eradicating smallpox, defines public health in this way. He says, "Science is based on the search for truth. Medicine is based on applying scientific truths for the benefits of patients. And public health is based on social justice. And it's based on this public health principle of social justice that public health is, for example, at the forefront of protecting the population by forming coalitions to reduce infant mortality disparities between Black and white infants. And also, public health was among the first to raise the alarms that Black Americans are disproportionately affected by COVID-19 during these times of this pandemic through their monitoring and surveillance activities. And as a result, you might have heard that Cleveland and Akron City Councils have both recently declared racism as a public health crisis. What do we do in our public health program? Well, our accrediting body says that we have to address certain competencies, which include discuss the means by which structural bias, social inequities, and racism undermine health and create challenges to achieving health equity at organizational, community, and societal levels, and also apply awareness of cultural values and practices to the design or implementation of public health policies or programs. So, we teach students that as a first step, they need to understand first themselves and their own biases, including implicit biases. Then we teach them that they should seek to understand others through models of cultural competence. And then we teach them to influence others. In public health, the best ways to make changes in the community are to use data, collaborate with diverse community stakeholders. As Andre said, it's going to take everyone. Institute relevant programming, and most importantly, to change policy. So we also teach about advocating and voting for legislators who believe in and reflect our values of eradicating racism. Also, and this opportunity only comes up every 10 years, we can encourage everyone to complete their census questionnaire, because the numbers that come from the census affect the number of legislators that represent us and the funding that we get for important programming. Now, as an educator, I also have suggestions for what we in the education community can do to help build an inclusive environment for our students. And I guess my biggest tip is we can listen. So in our program, we try to give students the opportunity to first share their correct name pronunciation and gender identity. So we have our new students make a video about themselves so that, first of all, we can learn their goals in the program, but also so that we know how students pronounce their names. We want to be able to pronounce our student names correctly. And then we can listen to their stories and encourage students to share in discussions on racism. So I would like us all to participate in an activity before I end my discussion. And this is a suggestion for how to do this on Zoom. Now, it's difficult sometimes to be able to get everyone to be able to provide suggestions or input on a question that you have in class. And so the opportunity is to provide designated silence time for people to think about it. So I want everybody in the chat box to write down the words suggestion. And then think quietly to yourself what we can do to engage our NEOMED community to address racism, but don't hit enter yet. I'm just going to give you several seconds of silence to write in the word suggestion and write in what we can do to engage our NEOMED community to address racism. But don't hit enter until I tell you to. Now, in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to tell you to enter, but don't enter yet. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now I'd like to hit everybody to enter. Thank you for engaging in this exercise. Just one way to engage our students. I'm now going to pass off to my colleague, Julie Altman.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. And the words that were popping up in the chat, I am eager to see the chat discussion. So that was a very valuable exercise. Thank you. As a clinical ethicist who is at the bedside and in the community, racism is a public health issue, and it's an ethics issue. But for far too long, we in the bioethics communities have failed to forcefully confront structural racism in our society and have not been vocal enough about the profound impact of racism on medicine, public health, or clinical care, despite the centrality of justice in our field. The Association of Bioethics Program Directors in the US and Canada, to which I belong, have come together the past 2 weeks to commit ourselves to listening, learning, expanding, creating new educational opportunities, and looking specifically at those types of justice that are desperately needed. As we have witnessed the complete lack of or very slow judicial proceedings unfold, with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the countless others who have been racially profiled, violated, and murdered, we need procedural justice to call out the racism within our social structures. For example, by making serious changes to law enforcement procedures and accountability. Violent acts and racial profiling among those who are supposed to protect and serve have got to stop. Compensatory justice requires compensating these families for our wrongs and for committing ourselves to change, to recognize that Black lives matter, and to explicitly prioritize racism as a public health issue. And finally, retributive justice. For those who engage in racism and violence against Black communities need to pay for their crimes in the court of law and in an expedited manner that is consistent and fair. Our victims are being re-victimized, even in death, because of our unfair and slow judicial system. Second, as director of the Graduate Studies Program in Ethics and Humanities, while we value our diverse graduate student body where there's a space to learn and discuss and grapple with topics of racism and social injustice in the coursework and academic activities, I am personally committed to expanding our offerings and creating more opportunities for funding and research where we can promote the work of Black scholars. As an important action step for our community, our librarian, Simon Robbins, and I will be working toward a repository of educational materials and research that focuses specifically on racism and social justice for our NEOMED community. Furthermore, our social justice pathway, a new pathway program, will be another opportunity for education, growth, and empowerment towards justice where students can enroll without fees and engage with faculty and peers throughout their education here. Finally, as a researcher, for those who know me, I've dedicated years to the study and exploration of social injustices, in particular structural racism, that continues and contributes to the health disparities that we bear witness in clinical environments. From critical examinations of racism in contemporary film to examining the social and racial injustices of refugees, my life's work has become the work of aspiring scholars through our mentorship and summer fellowships, and I commit to continue to this endeavor. As a member and chair of our IRB, the importance of protecting human subjects and following that principle of justice and research oversight, especially the inclusivity and safeguards that are needed to avoid past abuses on Black human subjects and on vulnerable populations, has been a personal critical mission of mine and one that started my career in research and ethics 25 years ago. We need to pay more attention to Blacks as a population in research, more opportunities for voluntary research and attention to protections when there are biases and abuses. Right now, prisoners and children tend to be the focus, yet Blacks and other underrepresented minorities as human subjects in the US are not on our ethics radar, and they need to be. Nor are there enough Black researchers sitting on review boards, data safety monitoring boards, federal grant review committees. I see this regularly, and as a member of these boards, I will be the voice for diversity and inclusivity and promise to make it my charge to do so. I promise to you, as an ally, I will commit to these commitments and hold my integrity to you, the NEOMED community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. I could hear the movement in your voice while you were talking. And, you know, we were teasing Callie yesterday about crying, and I think it's difficult for any of us not to be emotional when we're talking about this. So thank you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion, to speak today as the Executive Director of NEOMED's Coordinating Centers of Excellence in the Department of Psychiatry, and for today's purpose to focus really on the components of the work of our Criminal Justice Coordinating Center of Excellence. The Criminal Justice CCOE has a purpose or a mission to promote jail diversion alternatives for people with mental health disorders. The reason for the existence of this center is the significant overrepresentation of people with mental illness in our country's justice system compared to the general population. And when I say overrepresentation, I'm talking about higher arrest rates by police, prolonged waits for evaluation and case determination, longer sentences by courts, longer stays in jails and prisons once they're incarcerated, a greater number of probation and parole violations that return them to the court and to incarceration. And this sounds familiar, yes, because we're here today to talk about the fact that our Black citizens are living that very same narrative. And in the last couple of years, the Washington Post came out with a police shootings database report illustrating that 25.4% of police shootings are people in a mental health crisis. So that was very significant to our center. In the same report, however, they pointed out that 24% of police shootings are young African American males. I don't think that piece of the report got the same weight. I know it didn't by our center, and our Center of Excellence is not claiming expertise at the fight against racism, but we do have some experience using strategies of community and systems engagement and collaboration that are affecting change, sometimes slowly and painstakingly, but in the structural inequities experienced by a targeted group of people in Ohio. And so there are some strategies I want to highlight that are common to two of our major efforts. Those two efforts are crisis intervention teams, which is a community partnership program with a model of police-based crisis intervention with community, healthcare, and advocacy partnerships. Its basic goals are to improve officer and consumer citizen safety and redirect individuals with mental illness from the justice system to the healthcare system. And then the second is sequential intercept mapping, which is a community planning process that we use to bring stakeholders and citizens together from a variety of systems to openly discuss how a specific group of people come in contact with and flow through the justice system, and what resources and opportunities exist for effective, appropriate, alternative approaches. We then weigh in with recommendations on using those resources in different or more effective ways based on the best or most promising practices. So there are some opportunities common to these two strategies that we have found particularly pivotal and perhaps can be adapted to address racism within these same systems. One is to have a local group of committed stakeholders that come together to talk, to dialogue, to address the issue and develop truly collaborative partnerships. And this must include people across different systems that have the ability to affect change and the members of the community most affected by those inequities. It really helps to have a champion or multiple champions that have influence and name recognition and can bring people together and open doors for our state and national leaders. Effective training is important, but it's not enough. A lot of people think that training is the key here. It's important. There's no doubt that it's important. Effective training of police, judicial members, probation officers, corrections officers, training that provides accurate information, builds empathy, requires practice of new skills, such as de-escalation techniques, requires practice of listening and communication strategies. But I have to be clear that there's no indication right now that the CIT training that we do and that our communities do helps to reduce the disproportionate racial impact of police shootings or other brutality. Cultural humility, cultural competence outside of the focus of serious mental illness has been a challenge within our CIT training. And we have seen, as a result of that, a growth in the use of implicit and explicit bias training, which can bear good fruit. There may also be an opportunity for us to refocus our CIT training or advanced trainings in a way that takes race into account in terms of the officer's perceptions of risk. That's something we have to deal with, that bias and the reaction of officers. We have current programs in Ohio that do include other cultural humility or component sessions within their CIT training, such as poverty and Latinx population issues. It is a challenge, however, to get communities to include race, and that's a challenge we're going to need to address. Policies and procedures need to be developed at every law enforcement agency to be in line with what Chief Miansky outlined. And our criminal justice CCOE has now been invited to work with the Ohio Collaborative to develop a model CIT policy for the state of Ohio. And I'm delighted because within that model policy are statements about the use of de-escalation and less restrictive strategies for citizens. And the last thing I'll mention is the importance of data and accountability, the evaluation and research component of all of this. Local and aggregate evaluation of efforts and changes needs to occur. We're hearing a lot of different ideas and strategies coming forth in the media, some based in evidence, some not, some mixed. We need to discriminate and be wise in terms of what we choose to do and not latch on to the first thing that sounds good, but we need to know that it works. So it's important that we test out what we're doing and make adjustments along the way to get at what actually does work. And the last thing I'll say is that all of these strategies that we use, we stress the importance of the people who are affected by the strategies, by the policies, by the poor behaviors being at the table. We had a champion in Dr. Fred Fries, who died last year, who used to say, nothing about us without us. And I think that can be the mantra here as well. I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Allen. I'm a current rising M3 at NEOMED. I'm the outgoing president of Student National Medical Association and the newly elected Regional 5 Political Advocacy Liaison for the Student National Medical Association. And I'm also a part of the CSU NEOMED Urban Partnership. So many people that see me on campus usually see me walking around. I'm usually a very happy person. I remember one day in class, Dr. Zarkoni asked a student to come down to the front to do a practice patient interview. And I volunteered, and I remember at the end of it, he was like, you know, you have a very engaging, happy face or something along those lines. But today I come to you from a place of pain and a place of hurt over the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Nina Pott, and Ahmaud Arbery. So this past Tuesday, we had a meeting. It was with students at NEOMED as well as staff. It was a smaller meeting. I believe there was about 40 of us there. And we all got to talk about how we were feeling with everything that has been going on, as well as briefly bring up ideas of change. So when it was my turn to take the floor, I busted out into a cry. It was an ugly cry, and I was not expecting it. I did not cry because I'm weak. I cried because I'm tired. I am sick and tired of seeing this happen and reliving this trauma of seeing people in my community being killed senselessly. I am exhausted, and I'm ready for more than just words. It's time for change. As I continued speaking, I brought up a story about how my sister and I have been followed in Walmart. They called us over the PA and said, watch those girls, thinking that we were stealing. How I've been to a bowling alley when I lived in South Carolina, and an older white male came up and said, why are you N-words here, to me and my friends? These are not realities of the past. These are my realities that I have faced, and that was when I was 14 years old. During the conversation, one thing that the Rising P4 at Raymond said, as well as Dr. Haywood, they said, don't die on the battlefield. And that means a couple different things. It means that 2 Saturdays ago, when my parents both went to peacefully protest in Cleveland, I could not go. It's not that I didn't want to go. They just said, Laura, you have your USMLE Step 1 coming up in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You need to your form of advocacy is those books right now. And your form of advocacy is making sure that you can graduate across that stage and that you can be an advocate for our communities so that you can help these health disparities, as we heard earlier with Dr. Amy Lee, how Black people and Latinx people are dying at a disproportionate rate due to COVID-19. That's where your advocacy is, to make it through this curriculum. And I shook my head and I said, yes, you're right. But it's sad that I don't have the opportunity to do both. After that meeting, Carmen and a group of students, Diamante, Phoebe, I could just name so many students, decided that Black and Latinx students, that we would like to create a call to action as to what we can do as a NEOMED community to make sure that we can see the proper changes implemented. We created a Word document where we could all place our suggested changes. I will name two of the changes, but my colleague Diamante, who is speaking later, will elaborate on more of the ideas. And I understand this is one conversation, but we are expecting this to be a continual conversation. So one thing that Andre even touched on earlier is that us as brown and Black students would love to see more and are expecting to see more Latinx and staff in the College of Medicine and the College of Pharmacy. We need and want to see representation of us when we walk around that campus. That is just so important in the enrichment of our curriculum and us as students. We also, within the Department of Admissions, would like to see, or are expecting to see, more brown and Black students admitted to NEOMED, as to continue to diversify our class to fit what we actually see out in the community. Now, those were just two things that were listed, and I know in terms of the admissions, that is something that we have been working on this past year, a group collectively. But I just, would like to see changes, and we want to see changes move forward in with these regards. I want to thank you all for letting me speak and have this time to share my platform with you all. And I look forward to hearing everyone else, as well as my colleague Diamante, continue on. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Harris Haywood, Associate Dean in the College of Medicine and Director of the NEOMED CSU Partnership for Urban Health. I've been asked to speak a little bit about my journey through the health professions, particularly in my journey towards becoming a physician. I want to start by saying that I was aware very early on when I chose this profession of the historical plagues that are associated with being in the health professions and being a physician. I knew about the biases, the inequities, the racism and discrimination. I read so many stories about what it was like to be a physician practicing and how you had to develop very early on the strategies to remain in favor with the majority of the community to avoid being too successful, appearing pretentious, so that the majority community did not figure out how to eliminate you from the profession. In other words, I was taught very early on through my readings, being a physician while Black could kill you. Examples of that from 1918, a physician by the name of Dr. J.R. Miller in Vicksburg, Mississippi, a small town about an hour outside of Jackson. After 18 years of practicing there, when he decided to try to help put together a chapter of the NAACP, he thought that was the way to go. He was a graduate of Williams and a graduate of University of Michigan School of Medicine. He wanted to become an activist. And unfortunately, the leading citizens of that town tarred him, feathered him, put him in jail, and basically asked him to leave the city. Otherwise, he would get killed. It's things like this that reminded me that I'm going into a profession that could ultimately cost me my life. 40 years later, I learned about healthcare disparities and listening to stories of my aunt who died in a small southern city when she was being denied care at a white-only hospital. She died at home at 16 from a ruptured appendix. So as I fast forward to my life and I entered New Jersey Medical School 75 years after that, after what Dr. Miller experienced and 40 years after what my aunt experienced, I knew I was in the right place. I had my exposure to health disparities, and I also had my exposure to what it was going to be like being a Black physician. At New Jersey Medical School, I had tremendous mentorship. 3, 4, 5, 6 deep African-American physicians who taught me the resilience, how to choose my battles, what to fight, what I could win and what I could lose. They gave me the tools I needed to remain in the profession, which is why I'm here today. What I will say was all of what I learned in Newark, New Jersey, prepared me to come to Northeast Ohio. Because although I knew in New Jersey I was 6 out of 100 physicians and 3 out of 100 academic physicians, I saw so many people that looked like me, I was comfortable until I came to Northeast Ohio. And then I started to learn what it was like to be the only person of color in a room, to be the only Black faculty member in the College of Medicine who was full-time, to have to learn how to have a voice of inclusion, which has always been who I am, but a voice that says wrong is wrong, right is right, and we have to make changes. So I move forward now into the time we sit, and as the students are asking me, what tools and what pearls do I have to give them? Number one, you gotta love your profession. To be a change agent at this time means that you have to love what you do and you have to be willing to stand for what you do with an integrity and a grit that surpasses all understanding. There's no reason why I really want to share with my daughter that when I drive to NEOMED every day before the crisis, I have to have my clinic coat on my chair, my ID around my neck, my cell phone in the other seat, because there is a chance between Streetsboro and Rootstown on Route 42 that I am going to be stopped. Or there's a strong possibility that I will walk into Giant Eagle and somebody will ask me why I'm there, or Ravenna going into PNC, or going into just the Key Bank up the street from the school. Or even sometimes just having a different receptionist at the entry to the school, and she doesn't know me, and that day I'm fumbling for my ID. And instead of making her feel anxious to say, well, why are you here? Who are you? I have to reach out my hand and say, hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Harris Haywood. How are you? Something that I learned from my dad is to reach out to them first, see the pattern of behavior, because that could save your life one day. So the pearls that I leave, particularly with the students, as Laura heard me say, fight your battles. Recognize that you have to become a physician to increase your voice. Understand that we are in a situation where our profession has been one of racism, discrimination, and it is now systemic. It's no more overt. They're not going to kill us in broad daylight as a physician unless you were driving while Black, unless you were caught into the legal system. But there was a time, if you were a physician, you could get lynched. But that's probably not going to be the case. But you really, really, really do have to recognize not everybody is racist, but racism exists, and that you are a change agent with a voice. And as long as you stand, you can bring other people to stand with you, and we have a chance of changing what's going on both nationally, what's going on in our profession, and what's going on locally. So I remain encouraged. I fight every day, and I'm going to keep fighting, and I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to be here. So if you're ready to take on a battle, let's get together and let's organize our fight. I'll now pass it on to Diamante.
Thank you, Dr. Haywood. I wanted to start, I found a note in my phone from 2017 that I wanted to share with everyone. I'm not sure what was going on at the time, but I guess I wrote it to myself. I wrote, white privilege means not having to think about being white 95% of the time. and not needing to evaluate what that means in your current social context. I think about being Black at school, at work, driving, or walking down the street, often even when I'm walking into my own home. I think about my Blackness when I succeed. I think about my Blackness when I fail. How will it all be perceived? I am constantly wondering if being Black is affecting my day to day, hour to hour, pretty much my minute to minute. To me, Blackness has not really been the absence of being white, and yet I've often wondered if being white describes the absent experience that would have come with being colored. And so for me, everything that's been going on in the world, I think I've struggled a lot with the fact that, it seems like the world has woken up, and I'm not sure what made this specific instance, occur, but I am glad that we have these platforms to now speak. And so for me, I really want to hone in on some things that I've experienced at NEOMED and also things that we can truly be doing here at NEOMED, because I think as we take on this fight, we have to also remain hone into what we can actually do right now. So something that I've struggled with, the culture at NEOMED, is something I've continued to struggle with through the last year. It's something that I've had to manage while not letting it distract me from my academics, which can be hard when those things pervade my emotions, my mind. And, a lot of medical students describe imposter syndrome, and I feel that as a Black woman, I essentially had this different intersectionality that came with my imposter syndrome. Essentially, coming in on my first day, I didn't feel like I was supposed to be here. There were multiple students that didn't matriculate with me from my urban health pathway, and that was a pathway that was supposed to help minority students excel and attend. So I came in already feeling that I guess I was the exception, and usually other Black students were not supposed to succeed. I came in not seeing any Black professors, which meant that when looking for mentors, it was so hard to find people that looked like me, especially when I was struggling with things that I didn't feel comfortable just speaking to anyone about. Another thing that I saw was when we had lectures where things were describing situations or diseases that Black people were more likely to contract, there were no discussions regarding oppression, systemic racism. Comments were just kind of made without explanation, which I felt, students could take that from a lecture and not really understand why, or possibly even think that these were biological issues rather than things that have become true to America, but not necessarily in Caribbean and African countries. For me, there were multiple things said by professors that would stick with me that essentially made me feel that I couldn't succeed here. It felt racialized, but these were things that I couldn't ever prove to anyone. Multiple times I was called professional rather than getting true feedback in cases where I was given feedback. In general, I just felt like as a marginalized student, there was no real good way to address situations like this, and I just had to bury it. Either it would feel like I was guilty of attacking people when I did address it, or I would have to kind of bury it, which meant I was responsible for the work to not internalize these things and not letting it affect my academics. So something, I wanted to share all of these feelings because as I looked at the definition of institutional racism, systemic racism, this is the ideas of white superiority that are captured in everyday thinking at a systems level. As Dr. Haywood said, we're not looking just at one-on-one interactions anymore. This is how the big picture of how society is operating, how our school is operating, how our institution is operating. So we've been having URM meetings on a monthly basis, trying to speak about things that we need as Black students, as Latino students even, because at the end of the day, as we bring minorities into this space, we need opportunity for equity. A lot of us have come from disadvantaged backgrounds. A lot of us are marginalized, which means that when we're put on the same totem pole, we're not going to have the same outcomes because we're not starting at the same starting line. So some of these things that we've spoken about, definitely URM professors, being able to see professors that look like us, that we can see NEOMED values, Black and brown people. Being able to be paired with people of color for PACE experiences and also for seminars. So that's like the Watson Center seminars. Something that would have been good is being able to ask someone who's experienced these things, things like how should I wear my hair? How How should I react if a patient doesn't want to work with me? Or a patient has biases against me. Those are things that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable having that conversation with my leaders, but I would have if I knew that they understood the experience. Another thing is having more minorities even brought into the Watson Center as patients, because I do feel that all students need to be exposed to those patients and know how to engage with a person of color. Something that still shocks me now is, although I've had to, interact and work with the white community my entire life, basically, a lot of people have come to NEOMED not ever seeing a person of color, not ever engaging with a person of color. So I think this is our opportunity to expose them before they go out into the world as a physician. Having a physical space at the medical school that acknowledges contributions of alumni and physicians of color. Having an actual cultural competency element of HVM, bringing in multiple people of color to speak on their experience. The same way that we speak on Huntington's, we bring in patients who have the disease, bringing in people of color who understand the experience, who are speaking from experience, and whether they have research on top of that, I think it's important that they are themselves people of color. Having a way to report microaggressions that is non-confrontational and anonymous. And so I think, when that comes to lectures, being able to put that in there and have someone send an email or whatever it is to the professor, saying, a student mentioned a picture or a statement that was put in your lecture that was offensive to them. If you could, take a look at this. Having ways to call things out that doesn't involve us, taking on the battle every time. Having URM therapists to avoid bringing these things into our academics and to avoid internalizing racism. Something that I'm currently struggling with. I was put as a rising M2, but I'm actually going to be repeating M1 year after my grandmother was contracted COVID. And I'm going back. My biggest fear is, how does this look as a Black student? I never wanted to be the Black student that couldn't succeed. And that's something that I cannot move forward with my academics until I'm able to really delve into that and know that this has nothing to do with my race and that I can succeed. And these are topics that often it can be hard for students of color to, speak with people that don't look like them or haven't experienced these things. Funding towards URM conferences and networking opportunities. Something that we spoke about at the prior meeting was, since we don't currently have such a diverse and welcome environment at NEOMED, we as Black students have had to go out and find networking opportunities, conferences that we can go to, and we are asking for funding for these things. Another was a URM representative on the Diversity Council. So this kind of goes into, again, having someone who's experiencing what's going on be the person to relay that information to the Diversity Council. And lastly, a tangible way to expose the student body and staff to diversity. And my thoughts on that was to have a cultural competency requirement in which attending 1 to 3 events, let's say, of a URM student organization would be mandatory for both staff and students. One of the things is we spend a lot of time putting on programming for students and for staff that does highlight a lot of the things we're going through, or we want to be able to have these discussions, and we get really low turnouts. The same people kind of come to these events, and these are events where we want to share more about our culture. We want to share more, about what we're going through. So I think having something where, students and staff have to go to at least one event, I think would be a great way to do that. So really my message to admin is these are things we need done now. To be honest, I've been talking about this for so long, and we are tired of talking. We are emotional. We are exhausted. We're also tired of trying to succeed while battling institutional racism at this school. So as we discuss further ideas, we really need to hear back from admin about how these are going to be addressed and exactly when. I also want to give a message to any students on here. Please don't fall away as the fad of Black Lives Matter disappears. Please continue to support minorities at NEOMED and educate yourselves by attending our events. I'm the Vice President of SNMA, Student National Medical Association, and we are dedicated this year to programming that's going to engage, educate, and challenge the student body this year to create physicians that are well-rounded and culturally competent. So really my message is, everyone, please keep the same energy that you have right now. Keep the same energy.
Let me start now that I'm unmuted. So good morning, everyone. This is Joe Zarconi. I'm a member of the clinical faculty here. I want to start by celebrating the leadership of John Langell and Andre Burton and Rod Ingram for opening up this conversation. I think it's really important that this just be the beginning of a long and steady conversation in our community. So I want to thank them. I also want to celebrate the leadership of everyone who spoke before me, but particularly call out Laura and Diamante. We need to follow you. And so I really want to celebrate your leadership as well. So if we can agree that Black Lives Matter and really mean it when we say it, then we must certainly understand the rage that's currently fueling protests and demonstrations across this country, sparked by yet another brutal murder of a Black man by police officers, this time in Minneapolis. What I don't understand, though, is why similar protests have yet to erupt outside doctors' offices and hospitals over the Black lives lost at the hands of the healing professions. So we've known for a long time that minority Americans have poorer health outcomes compared to whites from preventable and treatable conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, asthma, cancer, HIV/AIDS, largely because minorities are subjected to adverse social determinants and unfortunately are disproportionately represented among the uninsured or underinsured. But since the publication of the landmark Institute of Medicine report entitled Unequal Treatment 16 years ago, we also came to know the roles that healthcare systems and healthcare providers play in the major disparities in healthcare, not just disparities in health, but in the disparities of healthcare for minority individuals and populations. And while that report laid out recommendations to resolve these disparities in care, not a lot, or certainly not enough, has changed in the intervening 16 years for minorities seeking healthcare. And so if George Floyd's murder has reminded us that we need better recruitment and training for the law enforcement community, I hope we can agree that the same is needed for the healthcare community. So as a health professions university, I want to argue that we have a moral obligation to prepare the next generation of healthcare providers in ways that will eliminate racial and ethnic disparities in both health and in healthcare. And how do we do that? First, we need ways to better know and understand ourselves. David Hilfiker wrote that before we can manage another person's brokenness, we must first manage our own brokenness. We all need better training in recognizing and understanding our own implicit and explicit biases. These are in all of us. And better training in how to manage or mitigate the impact of those biases on how we care for sick others, or better yet, through greater learning, overcome those biases. Second, we need to see this concept of cultural competency as mythical thinking, because we can never really achieve competency in truly understanding the lived experiences of another person. And in fact, traditional cultural competency approaches actually tend to propagate stereotypical thinking and what can be called single story thinking, that Black people eat too much salt or are less educated, don't trust their doctors, all Black people. I highly recommend the TED Talk by the Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Adichie, who points out the dangers of such single story thinking, saying that, and I quote, "When you show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, that is what they become." The consequence of that way of understanding others, in her position, is that it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we're different rather than how we're similar. Instead, I think we should lean toward training healthcare providers in what is being called cultural humility, to have the humility that recognizes that we can never fully understand an other, so that we're required to do all that we can to know them and understand them more fully as possible, if we are to actually care for them. Third, the other competency to which we should aspire is what Jonathan Metzl has termed structural competency. We know that minority populations have different life experiences, like a young Black man being pulled over by a police officer versus a young white man, not because of inherent differences in these two young men being apprehended, but because of a myriad of social, cultural, legal, political, and yes, even medical systems and structures that oppress one group and not another. We need better training about what these systems and structures look like, how they operate, and how to work toward their dismantling. And finally, we need to engage health professional learners in all manner of honest and uncomfortable conversations about how class bias and racism manifest in the culture of medicine and in the culture of medical education. And as importantly, promote the empowerment of their voices when they encounter learning environments that contradict all that they've been taught about what it means to be a healer and what it takes to be a healing profession. In the NEOMED curriculum, we have worked hard to move in all of these directions, but like the others who spoke before me, we aren't where we need to be. And we're motivated to push a lot harder, to promote the kind of education and social justice that will be required if we are to ever change the intolerable disparities in health and healthcare that we have understood for far too long. Silence is the enemy of justice, and so I look forward to this dialogue.
So there are a few questions that have been asked throughout the presentation, and I'm going to start with one of the first ones. And the first question is, were there any new College of Medicine faculty hires? Were they racially diverse individuals? And in the chat, if you can put the responses for those. The first person that would like to speak is James Moore. So I'm going to unmute him now and give an opportunity to speak.
Hello, everyone. I definitely speak on this forum. I thank everyone for attending, and I'm kind of shocked. This is like the first one I've ever been in. As far as workforce, this has never, ever been addressed. So I do commend us as NEOMED for doing so. And I just I was listening to everything, and I don't have anything written out. I really don't have to. My experience, I'll be able to just flow with it. Andre, his story speaks volumes because it happens to us every day. Like, I can get off this meeting, go to the store, and I'm in the same exact situation. I've been at the gas station. I've been called the N-word as well down the street from our job. I've been in our parking lot. This right here really disheartens me. Not name calling or anything like that, I never would. But what I will say is this: the same people that I technically assist, or like Dr. Haywood say, she may medically assist, there's a different atmosphere inside the building than out. Once I walk out that door and I head to my car, if there's a person of another color coming the opposite way, they may clutch their purse. Even though I'm the same person who's helping them on the inside with the PowerPoint slide or whatever else, that stereotype is still there. We still live it. So if we can just be cognizant of that. I understand safety, but sometimes there's more involved. There's also the fact, like he said, of being pulled over. The other doctor said it as well. I do the same thing: wallet, ID, have every paperwork lined up, driving straight, don't tint your windows. Oh, I like that car. Oh, better not get it. Might scream I'm a drug dealer. Oh, don't get that car. It's a little too raggedy. It might scream you don't belong in this area. These are the type of things that we work with. Now, as far as being pulled over, I worry about that every day as well, and I've been pulled over in the NEOMED parking lot. My car went dead, and I needed a jump. And I've been seen several times before that, got an ID badge made, everything. Talked to my manager about some incidents, because it went from, hey, park there, park over there, park here. You know, what are you here for? And then it turned into, when I needed a jump, my plates got ran. And that really hurt me. So I asked a couple of other people that work here, is that their experience? And it wasn't. I let it go because at the time I was a contractor. But just little things like that. If that's what we're doing across the board, someone's car dies, they need to jump in the parking lot. If we're running them, then hey, that's fine. I'm all for it. But if we're not, then, you know, it just made me feel some type of way. So I definitely wanted to say that I think that driving while black is definitely a thing. Working while Black. That's, I don't know if you guys are hip to that, but that's another thing that goes around African culture a lot, working while Black. We do, as a culture, how do I want to put this? I was taught, let me just speak from my experience. I was taught at a young age, you have to work hard, very hard, even harder than the next person because of your color. So be prepared to do 3 and 4 and 5 jobs. Sad, but yep, pretty much that's the culture in Africans. That's how you're raised if you're a go-getter. So I was taught that too at an early age. And it's just as far as career paths and things like that, I really do love NEOMED. I have seen where person A might have a career path that's ironed out, you know, printed up and everything, and person B may not have anything. So if there's just more consistency across the board, I think that would definitely just help. And also, if we were just more cognizant of each other in the parking lot, we're the same people inside the building and out. And I don't know about others, but I can definitely attest to being treated one way in the building and then another way outside of the building. So I just want to make us all cognizant of that. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, James. I want to share a comment that was put in the chat as well. It is difficult to unpack the burden that comes up with being a person of color. It's especially challenging to share experiences with persons that have not been taught the history of intentional segregation that compromised the foundation of all America's social institutions: housing, education, policing, employment, government, healthcare, etc. What can be done to teach our students, faculty, and staff about generational stagnation that has been created? These areas of stagnation have created the opinions that people of color are unintelligent, lazy, criminals, and incapable of humanity. When will we share context behind these thoughts and perceptions that are held as personal truths? I'm emotionally exhausted. Another question that was posed, and this is for Callie. Do all police departments do a psychological analysis before hiring a new officer? And if not, why don't they? What are the obstacles for making this a requirement? Give me 1 second, I'm muting Callie.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't speak for other departments. I believe a lot of the ones around here do some type of psychological. It's not required. I feel that it's very important, and that's why we have had that step in our process since day one. I think it is probably one of the most helpful steps that we have in our process. But again, I cannot speak to the other departments. I think in the state of Ohio, we are going to see some more mandates coming down from the governor. So that would be, right now, there aren't really any mandates as far as hiring goes. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of those mandates do have to do with the hiring process.
I'd like to share something I didn't put down that I was going to speak, but I want to speak to this a little bit as well. Don't talk much, I don't put it out in the open that much about me and my family, but racism, what it's like to experience racism for the first time, especially when it's not directed at you, but you see it. You feel it through a person you love and care for, and seeing the fear and anger when these atrocities happen. My wife, my best friend, have experienced these for the past 17 years. I've seen and been a part of these terrible events. I've gone to some bars in Northeast Ohio and around the US and other establishments and walked in with no ID and asked for a drink without a problem. And to turn around and see her get carded and then ask for a second form of ID. There's been times when we've been at social events where the first comment upon meeting her by some people is how well you speak. or on a road trip getting pulled over to take a rest or at a rest stop and stopped by police and questioned by the officer, seeing the tensity of the moment. And it wasn't to check to see if everything was okay. It was a check or the assumption of ill intentions. I see her wage disparity at her job. A 35-year-old director with a PhD is working the same job as her predecessors for $20,000 less. Why? Because she's Black and a female. I've been on college sport teammates, where they distanced themselves from myself because I didn't want to hang out with their group. I preferred to hang out with, in quotes, the Black kids, or getting pulled over after a game because I was driving with 4 teammates in the car who all happened to be Black. When coaching, when I was teaching at K through 12, and hearing other coaches talk about players and referring to them as the Black kid and not the person that they are, or the Muslim kid, it's all sickening. There are countless other examples, but why I chose to speak up and stand up is because not only is my wife my best friend, Black and Asian, but I have a 10-year-old daughter who is the best of both of us. When I walk into parent-teacher conferences and the surprise of her teachers when my wife walk in together, or if they've met her first and they met me second, and the look of surprise in their face. She deserves a better place. We all deserve a better world. We all need to be better and the best version of ourselves, and it's time to make a stand and stand up together. The next question is for Julie Altman. Can you talk a little bit more about NEOMED's Diversity Council goals, number, composition?
I'm trying to unmute myself. Okay. So the Diversity Council is made up of 25 individuals, faculty, staff, and students that represent a variety of different groups, organizations. We have Latino students, Black students representing. We represent our LGBTQ community. We're also focusing on inclusivity. And we have focused our efforts. Right now we're focusing on efforts of trying to improve our community, our NEOMED community, and starting to break down the structural racism, institutional racism that Diamante was talking about. And we do. We need to put our efforts there. We're also working to focus on identity and representing our trans community and our LGBTQ community, of how we identify ourselves, and some of the ways in which our layers of vulnerability need to be understood. And so our membership, our allies, and we're working to learn from each other. There's oftentimes education. We also focus on Title IX issues. And there are some important federal guidelines, changes to the federal guidelines that we're tackling to understand and trying to make our community safe for students, faculty, and staff. And so there are several initiatives going on, and we are representing a variety of different departments and student organizations, and we are here to listen and learn.
The next question is for Ruth. Does the center educate NEOMED students currently? Is there an opportunity to do so?
So the centers collectively, we do have some staff and faculty that are involved in some of the curriculum and education with students. But if you're asking if the centers educate students on the specific practices that we currently have in place, I'd have to say that's pretty much a resounding no. And I think it's something that should be on the table. And I don't know what the opportunities within the curriculum might be. But I myself, if I'm going to be completely honest, have had such limited interaction with students in the 8.5 years that I've been there, and limited opportunities to do that. I think we need to have a greater discussion about how we go about that, because I think it would be important.
At this time, before Dr. Langell adds in some closing remarks, Russell Spieth would like to speak.
Hi, everyone. I'm Russell. I'm a psychologist. I'm the managing director of Campus Mental Health. I want to say I wouldn't be either one of those things, definitely, if I weren't white. Sometimes I had privileges that I've been aware of. Sometimes I've had privileges that I've been unaware of. One specific thing is, many of you know my story, but I had a significant drug problem back about 25 years ago. I sold, I had so many interactions with police. I'm shaking because I get scared about it and embarrassed about it and shameful about it, and they let me go. And they'd oftentimes say, what's a good boy like you in this kind of area? Or what's a good boy like you getting into this? And I know very clearly from working on criminal justice reform ever since that time that many people, and especially Black, African-American, Latinx people, did not have that same opportunity. So I would have multiple felonies. I wouldn't have been able to be a psychologist. And then fast forward to NEOMED. I've had one promotion at NEOMED. It would be ignorant for me to say that a part of that wasn't because I was white and male and other things you could say, based on people's ease at being around me, perhaps, or people who had power over me, the way in which they perceived me. So I say all that to say that really the way I know to begin to promote community as well as to work on my own biases is to talk about myself. Secondly, as part of the mental health committee, or the mental health directives here at NEOMED, I'm really aware that we need to do a better job of being more inclusive. We're likely quite Eurocentric, and some of the issues we heard, internalized racism and how that may exacerbate imposter syndrome, issues of managing microaggressions with peers, colleagues, employees, patients, are things that we need to do a better job on. So I'm hoping that in my efforts at NEOMED, I could more connect with the URM group, if you all would have me, and just to learn more from you all about how we could be a better partner. Thank you, Mike, and thank you all.
Dr. Langell?
Thank you to everybody for being present today, for participating, for opening up this conversation and allowing us to learn from this conversation. I think it speaks volumes that of our population at NEOMED, almost 20% of us are present today. That says a lot, that we all do want to step up and we do want to be leaders. And we have incredible leaders, many of whom we heard speak today. I especially want to thank Diamata Panford and Laura Allen for their eloquent and really important message. I think I could sit with Diamata for quite some time as she gave us a huge number of potential fixes that we can put into place immediately. And she did say, we need to hold you accountable, the administration, the leadership of this university, and she's absolutely right. We need to be held accountable, and you need to be held accountable, all of you. Don't let this end it. As the press and as the attention dissipates, don't let our attention dissipate. Be active, be engaged, ask for us to do more, participate in the process and do more. Racism is systemic. It's intentional. It's unintentional. It's an act of commission and an act of omission. And if you look at anything we do as an organization and you say, I'm not racist and there's no racism at work here, I challenge you to look again, because you're wrong. I sent out an article from Dr. Kamara Jones. I hope all of you take a chance, take the time to read it. She very eloquently, through stories, shares what privilege is and how you don't see it when you have the privilege because you're not looking for it. And I would also recommend that all of you read an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago. For the first time in this country's history, we have a chief of staff for one of our military branches, General Charles Brown. And in that article, he shares his wisdom. And that wisdom includes and is really paying a huge amount of attention to how he has experienced systemic and intentional and unintentional racism throughout his career. And if you read that, you will better understand what you may not understand already, what the concept of privilege is like and how there's a dichotomy and an experience of life that shares two views. And if you're not sharing the view of those who are experiencing the racism, then you're not seeing it from their eyes and you're not understanding the impact that it actually has on our society. So thank you to all of you, really. This is so critically important for us to address, and we will address it. We will stand up and show our community how this can be done. And we will follow this on with more events. We're not going to let this slide. We are going to continue to address this. I do also want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that Dr. Blacklow, one of the former presidents of our university, is in attendance here today and texted me during the discussions to say how proud he was that we were leading this charge, that it's, in his opinion, has been absent for quite some time at NEOMED, and that what we're doing is the right thing. So thank you to Dr. Blacklow. Thank you to all of you. Please internalize what you've learned today. Go home, think, write your ideas down, email us your ideas, and then when we come back to revisit this and revisit this soon and revisit this with multiple recurrences, that we can have those discussions and implement your ideas and implement change. I'm going to charge all of you here today, but especially Mr. Burton, and also Dr. Altman and Dr. Zarconi and our students to start thinking about the ways that we can change the way we teach, that we can change the way healthcare is delivered, and we can change the way our community perceives their experiences on and off our campus. Thank you to everybody.